Hey everyone, it's Indiana Jones here. No, actually Daniel Elwood, and Robert Paul Johnson is my co-host, and we are the Last Nighters. You can find us at lastnighters.com and also on the Liberty Movement's YouTube channel. And of course, I'm wearing the hat in honor of the movie choice tonight. It is Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. You can find the show notes and more for this one at lastnighters.com/185. And we have a hell of a guest for you tonight. This was a Steven Spielberg movie, and he's been on for Steven Spielberg movie last year. With Saving Private Ryan. It is, of course, Prof CJ of the Dangerous History podcast. And welcome back to the show. Where can people find what you do there, CJ? And why don't you just give them a little bit about, what you do over there?
Okay, yeah. If you just type in dangeroushistorypodcast.com, that'll take you to my homepage, or just search for the Dangerous History Podcast wherever you like to consume your podcasts. I cover the history that the establishment would rather you not know about. So lots of topics, mostly American history, sometimes other stuff too, though. Currently, I'm up to my eyeballs in a giant series about Woodrow Wilson. I'm on episode 8 of that series, and I'm only at the end of his first year in the White House. So there you go. If you thought you hated Woodrow Wilson before, check this series out. You'll find out there's like 1,000 more reasons to hate him than what you thought.
All right, and he was in office for quite a few more years after that, too. So you got your work cut out for you.
7 more to go. 7 more to go, and the worst is still to come. We still have a few years to get to World War I and all that. So, yeah, we got that to look forward to.
All right, well, I'm going to make the argument that this movie doesn't happen without that guy.
Yeah. No, I'd agree.
All right, so there it is. Fan fiction theory. Woodrow Wilson, responsible for Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones, and Nazis.
Yeah. I mean, if the Allies didn't put such a punitive treaty on Germany at the end of World War I, it's extremely unlikely that the Nazis would have ever become a major political force in Germany and taken over. And it's also, maybe not impossible, but it's much less likely that World War II would have happened, at least when and how it did anyway. So yeah, that's the short version, which I'm sure is also what you were thinking.
Right. And you'll probably get to that in episode like 15 or 16 or 27.
Yep.
All right. Well, very good. Well, we will have links to your podcast and your previous appearance, which was lastnighters.com/127 for Saving Private Ryan. And this one is lastnighters.com/185. And Robert, how we usually kick this off is with the Google description. But before we do that, I'm going to ask for your sound effects, please.
Get ready. I'm ready. You do it. Ba-womp.
That's right. We're talking about Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It is the first film in this series. Some would argue that there are actually only 3 films currently existing in the series, but they unfortunately did make a 4th one called Crystal Skull.
And working on a 5th.
They are working on a 5th, but they are on a hiatus because old man Ford has injured his shoulder, requiring surgery, and we don't know when that is going to resume and be completed. But here we go with the Google description here. I'm bringing this main screen. This came out 40 years ago, so that's another reason why this is on the docket tonight. So Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark got 8.4 out of 10 on IMDb, 95% Rotten Tomatoes, 85% Metacritic, and 92% of Google users like it. The description reads, epic tale in which an intrepid archaeologist tries to beat a band of Nazis to a unique religious relic, which is central to their plans for world domination. Mwahaha. Battling against a snake phobia and a vengeful ex-girlfriend, Indiana Jones is in constant peril, making hair's breadth escapes at every turn in this celebration of the innocent adventure movies of an earlier era. Oddly enough, this movie, brought to you by capitalism, was released in the Soviet Union on June 15th, 1981, directed by Steven Spielberg, with a story by George Lucas and Philip Kaufman, produced by Frank Marshall. Had a budget of $20 million and made a 20-bagger, nearly $400 million at the box office. And we will go to Robert for your opening, please.
Fantastic, Daniel. Yes, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So, classic series, the entire Indiana Jones series. Crystal Skull is a big flaming pile. I can't imagine what they're going to do with this next one. I'm sure they're going to have some young new guy. People talked about Chris Pratt being able to do it, and I tend to agree. He could probably fill those shoes for the most part. But I think Harrison Ford brought to the role of he's a very destructible hero. He's always hurting himself. He's kind of the Jackie Chan of action stars. Jackie Chan would punch a guy, and then he'd like hurt his hand, and he'd kick his something, and then his foot would hurt. He's not like really good. And same with Indiana Jones. I mean, yeah, he'll punch a guy and he'll be okay, but then he'll get hurt, stabbed, shot. Not exactly like life-threatening stuff, but you feel like he's older than he looks because of all the crazy situations he puts himself in. It's a lot of fun. Steven Spielberg famously was a big fan of the old like Flash Gordon serials. He wanted to bring that energy to the big screen. The favorite thing I have about this film is its plot. It does feature, as you guys were talking about earlier, the Nazis and Hitler's fascination with the occult, specifically like the Christian occult, which has been mined by numerous pop culture properties. The main one that springs to my mind, because I'm also a big fan of it, is Mike Mignola's Hellboy series, which features Nazis summoning demons and looking for other paranormal things. But in this one, he's searching for the Lost Ark of the Covenant. He's searching for, the ark that holds the two stone tablets of the Ten Commandments as God handed down to Moses. It's interesting that I don't know if there was a time period in the movie, like at a specific year given, but we get the impression that it's either pre-war or maybe in the middle of World War II. I get the impression that it's pre-war, but
yeah,
I could be wrong. Okay, it is for sure.
Yeah, 1936. I think it actually says that in the very opening like caption.
Okay, fair enough. Well, then that screws over one of my theories, but still, it'll be fine. Because he was famously into the occult, and Christians have a large number of holy relics, such as, and I did a little Google search. So the Spear of Destiny is one of them that's been mined for all kinds of different pop culture things. The spear that pierced Jesus' side, the scourging pillars of Saints Peter and Paul, the head of Saint John the Baptist, the beheading column of St. Paul, the Shroud of Turin, Jesus's crown of thorns, these kinds of things, all, if you believe that they hold some kind of power. The Spear of Destiny is said that anybody who wields it is an army that could not be defeated. I think in this movie, it's the Lost Ark that they talk about how it has amazing power if you open it. And of course, at the end of the movie, it's like obliterating people. I don't know why. If you close your eyes, you're okay. It seems to render that as a weapon pretty ineffective. I'm sure people would figure it out real quick, and you just wear sunglasses and then you could just go mow people down. I don't know, but it's a really fun action film. You don't take it too seriously because there's a few points in the movie where he's like teleporting a little bit, like he's on top of a U-boat and the U-boat goes like 1,000 miles. And you're like, is he just outside on top of the U-boat this whole time for like weeks? How is he alive? And then he shows up at this port, and then all of a sudden he teleports onto in a hidden little hidey spot. Anyway, it's all, not supposed to take it too seriously, but overall it's a fun semi, alternate history world that Indiana lives in. I definitely want to get your guys' opinions on his career, like what he does in his spare time. Like, is it a moral activity? Is it immoral? Who really owns these relics? Is he doing the world a favor? Is he robbing anybody? Because, states usually claim ownership over these things, right? If like Egypt says, we own all the Egyptian relics, and if you take them away, you're stealing from Egypt or whatever. And anyway, we can talk about that. But overall, I mean, who doesn't love Indiana Jones? It's a fantastic film. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a watch. Almost probably indefinitely. It's so good. Anyway, yeah, that's my basic opening take.
Yeah, and it still holds up really well. I was kind of impressed by that because I haven't, sat down and watched this in years. I mean, the last time I probably watched it in its entirety was when I was a kid. And I'm expecting, to watch it at however the hell old I am now and seeing all these glaring holes and like how dated everything is. But no, it's actually, it's so well done. And it has that recipe of just enough camp to where you don't need to take it too seriously. And you know that you're having fun with it, that it kind of gets a pass. It's not taking itself too seriously. So it doesn't seem to get aged in that way. But Prof CJ, I consider you as a historian, almost an archaeologist of history. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on for this one. And also it's the 40-year anniversary. So I thought it was a timely time to do this, and wondering what your take is related to this film and anything that Robert has brought up so far.
Well, I love it too. I just rewatched it earlier today for the first time in probably just a couple of years, because I rewatch these movies every few years. I had the Indiana Jones movies on VHS growing up as a kid. I watched them a zillion times, and I watched it today. My full set DVD that I've had since 2003. I pulled it out. And, yeah. So that's how much of a fan I am. And yeah, it's iconic. I also hate the Crystal Skull. The fourth disc here is bonus material for the 3 real movies of Indiana Jones. The Crystal Skull, I prefer to not even talk about, and I'm absolutely terrified and disgusted at the thought of one more Indiana Jones movie, because they're going to wreck it even more. I am worried. But it's iconic from the opening, right, where the Paramount Mountain turns into a real mountain. And then, as soon as you see that silhouette with the hat, it's just boom. And Hollywood, they used to be so good at making action movies and comedy movies with some action, right? Mm-hmm. And if there's 2 kinds of movies they used to be pretty good at making that they've completely forgotten how to make, it's comedies and action movies in recent years. And so it's nice to watch something from back when Hollywood knew how to make a good action movie or a good comedy movie. And it's a perfect blend. I mean, it doesn't take itself too seriously. He's a cool guy and a hero, but he's not perfect. He screws up. He makes mistakes. He gets in over his head. He's got some weaknesses. He's got, of course, his famous phobia of snakes. So, that's what makes for a great action hero, is somebody who is a little bit vulnerable, who you feel like, well, this guy is a little bit in over his head, and yeah, he can, do some cool stuff and he can fight and whatever, but he's not Superman. He's not easily, like in modern movies with, really fake fight choreography and CGI everything and whatever, where there's like tensionless action and you really don't feel at all like anything real is happening, right? You go back and look at this thing, it's all practical effects that all still look real. The only effect in the whole movie that I thought, looked not great and dated is at the end when the Ark, does its thing. And that, if they did that today, they'd do it all CGI and they would probably way, way, way overdo it. So, at least since they didn't have CGI back then, they had to keep that part a little bit more restrained than they would today. But it's a great movie. It's a fun movie. It's a movie like the last one I talked about with you guys about a year ago. It's another one where it actually makes sense for Nazis to be bad guys. So often Nazis are made the bad guys in Hollywood movies, and it's just lazy writing. It's just like, we need a villain. Well, let's make him a Nazi or a neo-Nazi or whatever. But at least it makes sense if you're in the mid-30s. I will say, just randomly, one historical thing that bothered me, and obviously I realize like it's a, kind of a fantasy movie and whatever. One historical thing that actually, of all things, kind of irked me a little bit when I thought about it, was that in the movie, it's 1936, and the Nazis are running an archaeological dig in Egypt. That wouldn't have happened, because in 1936, Egypt was still under the control of the British Empire. And they definitely wouldn't have let Nazis go in and start digging around in Egypt in 1936. That was the only part of the movie, of all things, where I was like, oh, that broke the that broke the illusion for me. But anyway, it's a great movie.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges of knowing too much, right?
Yeah, I'm always the worst person to watch anything historical, even if it's historical fantasy or whatever, because I'll be like, yeah, okay, I'm cool. There's ghosts. Fine. I'll accept that for the sake of the movie, that there's ghosts or there's magical stuff going on or whatever. But like, this country over here wasn't called that at that time period, or, this empire wasn't over there back then. So
Right.
yeah, I'm the worst.
That didn't even exist. And
yeah, it's like watching ER with a doctor sitting next to you, right? He's just going to be constantly like, they wouldn't do that. That's BS. That's made up. That's fake. So
yeah. Robert, you mentioned Chris Pratt, and he's in some movie on Amazon. I forget what it's called, maybe Tomorrow War or something like that. And Jack Lloyd, our friend from The Voluntarist, he had a great post about the firearm that the Chris Pratt character has in the Tomorrow War, and it's a dialogue of him going to a gun store and saying what kind of thing he needs, and it's like, okay, it's these really massive aliens, so I'm going to need like this scope on it so I can like pinpoint accurately shoot them from 10 feet away. And, it's like he needs penetrating rounds. So, well, the only thing we have is like 5.56 or whatever. So he's like, all right, well, then you're going to want a like super long barrel to get as much velocity behind it as possible. It's like, no, I need a super short barrel. And it just like narrows it down to like just the totally worst possible gun. And that's, of course, the one that they use in the movie.
And I do that too, because I'm a gun guy too. But I have to say, in this movie, Indy's gun is perfect. He's got a Smith & Wesson model 1917, which is a revolver in .45 automatic caliber, the same caliber as a 1911. And that's actually a perfect gun for him to have, because that was a GI issue gun in World War I. Because in World War I, they couldn't produce enough 1911 automatics for all the soldiers. And so they also got some revolvers made in .45 caliber from Smith and Wesson and Colt as well. So even as a gun guy, I'm watching it. I'm like, that's the perfect gun for him to have. That makes total sense.
Okay.
Yeah, and the action is choreographed in the way that he's not just endlessly shooting round after 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 round. It's not like your typical 80s, we're going to unload thousands of rounds into whatever. It's choreographed in the way that, no, a gun with that, a revolver with a decent sized barrel, you can actually hit something at a distance pretty good. And then the Jackie Chan-ness is allowed to come in with all the using the environment to beat up the enemy. It makes for a much more entertaining, varied experience, as opposed to a lot of the more lazy writing that you see in later movies.
And I'll say one of my favorite little just snippets in the movie, ever since I was a little kid watching it, is the classic scene where the guy comes out with a sword and he's doing all the fancy, and then Indiana Jones just like kind of smirks and just calmly, boom, just takes him out with one shot and then just walks away. It's like, yep, that guy brought a sword to a gunfight.
Yeah,
and isn't there a story that he was actually feeling pretty ill that day and he couldn't do all the stunt that he was supposed to do? That it was actually supposed to be a sword fight, but he couldn't do it.
Oh wow, I didn't even know that one.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. I don't know if it's like a rumor or if it's actually true, but yeah, apparently he was feeling ill, and so he just, all right, well, all I can really do is just shoot him, and it becomes like this serendipitous thing that makes the scene iconic and work so well. And there's so many like set piece iconic things in this movie that you almost don't care that it has those like teleportations that you were talking about earlier. Like we just care that he's like there at the, the swapping the idol and the boulders chasing him. And I don't know, in watching it, you're like, kind of like, oh, well, if the boulder was going to come out, why didn't he just like wait, cause like he gets right in front of it before it rolls down that ramp. But it's, it's still fun. It's a well done movie that that they had these ideas in mind, that they were like, all right, well, we got to have this happen, and we got to have this set piece, we got to have this set piece, and then we kind of have to connect them together a little bit, and it works.
Yeah, and this is also a film that has inspired new generations of filmmakers. And I don't know, these are probably people that are already working or have been working for some time, since this is 40 years old. But there are all kinds of fan films made with 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, young teenagers reenacting Indiana Jones scenes or making their own little Indiana Jones movies. This is the kind of fun. You have an everyman hero, and you know, a young kid feels like, I could be him. It's way different than, say, like the Marvel movies or like a John Wick character where he's like this sort of unstoppable Terminator guy. You know, it's much more, even though he is an iconic character and he's got a great amount of character, he's not some superhero. You feel like you could be him. And that's the beauty of this movie.
And there is the scene in, you know, near the beginning where he's doing his professor thing and he's got his little bow tie on and whatever. And, you know, that kind of humanizes him in a way. It's sort of like when Superman is Clark Kent and he's like, oh, he's actually kind of dorky, you know, even though he's got the groupies and everything, which, you know, I guess you go into archaeology for the same reason you go into history. It's primarily for the groupies.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's for the ladies.
It's for the ladies.
That's right.
Ironically enough, that's why I went into the degree I did in college, because it's where the cute chicks were. But I didn't have as much luck as Indiana Jones did with the girl with "I love you" over her eyes. That was a nice touch.
Yeah, I've been teaching for I don't want to think about close to 15 years, and I've never had that happen yet. So still waiting for it.
You say yet. I appreciate it. That's the spirit.
Well, I guess the question is, have you worn your Jack Burton shirt to teach? Because I think that might do it.
Yeah. You know, that's probably it. I haven't.
All right. Well, so
it's all in the reflexes.
You come to us for for ladies' advice. So one thing I wanted to bring up is this concept of looking at something historical, 40 years old, from today's perspective, and what we could consider now as problematic. And I saw some stories that, and I don't know if this is Google serving it to me because I was researching the film and making plans with UCJ to like do this episode, but they know your search history and whatnot, and they start showing you stories related to it. So I started seeing like all these things about Harrison Ford shooting episode or season 5 or whatever you call it, the 5th movie, and his injury to his shoulder. But then also stories about how the Marion character, it's problematic now that some of the dialogue of her speaking to him at the Nepalese bar is about how she was young and that he took advantage of her. And they're like equating it to, did he potentially, do like something that is frowned upon, like was she underage or did he force himself on her, things like that. And people are reading that into the dialogue. And so I saw those stories and before watching this movie again, and I tried to like put my mind into, okay, what are they seeing here? And I watched it and I'm like, no, it's very obvious that he was the student of her dad and that he got involved with her and they were both young and he wasn't ready to, be in a long-term relationship. And so it fell apart. But they see this like victim kind of story where, there's this potential for it to be an underage and a nefarious thing. And Indiana Jones is a bad guy. Have you guys heard about this at all? And can you see like that perspective, or does it make sense to you? I'll go to Robert first.
I guess if you're not paying close attention to the dialogue, sure. Or if you're interpreting it uncharitably, like the dialogue is vague enough that they could be alluding to a grape scene. But I think you're probably more on the nose with your take that they were both young. They had some kind of relationship, but this is Indiana Jones you're talking about. He's got, all kinds of these ladies chasing after him, and he's got this passion for archaeology of all things. And in the world in which he exists, archaeology is super cool. I mean, he's got relics like this exist in the world still that aren't already snatched up and in museums, even though in most, okay, there still are some relics in the world, and they are still hidden in some tombs, undoubtedly. But you really don't. I don't think you see like these traps and these puzzles to get at these treasures. Most of the treasures that have actually already that exist in museums have been there because grave robbers have already stolen them long, long ago, and they were passed down to different wealthy families or whatever. It's been in somebody's family for generations, and then eventually it winds up in some museum, or it's just openly taken out of some tomb and then sold to like the British Museum or whatever. But I don't think that an actual archaeology is spent, fighting Nazis and solving puzzles and that kind of thing. As much as I want it to be, you don't get to solve tons of puzzles to figure out where, the throne room is buried or whatever. It's more about seismology and figuring out where there are empty spaces in the ground and where to dig and that kind of thing. I mean, there's some cool things about it, but I don't think it's as action-packed as the movies play it out to be. It's more like digging up dinosaur bones. You're just out in the desert with a little brush and shovel. I don't know. I'm not an archaeologist, but I just imagine it's not as cool as it's all plays up to be.
Well, if you want me to chime in on the Marion thing first, I read somewhere when I was reading around in the past couple of days that they were saying like, well, Indiana Jones was 10 years older than Marion, and so when they would have had whatever affair they had or whatever, she was only like 16 and he was like 26. And I'm not sure where they got those specific ages from, because the movie doesn't mention anything about either of their ages, either at the time of the film or at the time of whatever affair they had, nor does it specify exactly how far apart they are. Like, it leaves it very vague. So I don't know if there's actually any real basis for those claims of ages and whatever, if there was like an early draft for the script where it was really specified or something.
Mm-hmm.
But, also, this is in the mid-1930s. There's still, as far as I know, there's still states today in the U.S. where the age of consent is like 15 or 16. And I would imagine in the 1930s, it was probably lower than that in some places. So, I'm not necessarily comfortable with like a 15-year-old hooking up with a 25-year-old. That definitely raises some issues and whatever. And I definitely wouldn't be cool with my daughter in that situation. But at the same time, A, they don't specify the ages in the movie, and B, in the 30s, things would have been a bit different as far as people's standards and expectations and whatever. And it's also interesting too, that when she says something like, "Oh, I was young and in love, you were taking advantage of me," kind of, his response is, "You knew what you were doing." Which is interesting, because you could make like almost a sex positive feminist argument and go, he's giving her agency in a way. He's kind of saying it takes two to tango. Now you could still debate back and forth, if she was 15 or 16 or whatever, do they really have the wherewithal? Should the age of consent be higher? But that's a whole different, I don't know. To me, within the context of the movie, it's very, I don't know. It's very kind of vague, and within the context of the time period, it's a little bit murky. On the question of archaeology and all that, yeah, my understanding is, and I've read like some serious archaeology, like academic books of various types for some of the stuff I've done when I'm dealing with like, ancient history in different places. And it seems like a lot of what archaeologists do is like really boring stuff, like sitting around looking at a small shard of pottery going, all right, is this from the 4th century or the 5th century of Crete? And but that said, if you go back late 19th, early 20th century, there were some archaeologists. Now, some of them were, amateur archaeologists, not affiliated with any universities or whatever. But there were some archaeologists who kind of were a little bit adventuresome back in those days. There was a guy, and I'm blanking on his name. There was a real American guy who supposedly Indiana Jones was partly inspired by. An American who traveled to some pretty remote places in the early 20th century, especially like Mongolia and stuff, and was like, maybe not getting into quite as many shootouts and fights or whatever, but was going into some dangerous places and maybe getting into some scrapes with the natives and whatever. So, that kind of stuff was probably starting to be on the way out by the 30s, but it probably was still happening some places around the edges.
Well, let's talk about that. So what is he doing but going into these places where he doesn't have a claim to the land and robbing the tomb? Now, you could say that the owner of that tomb is long dead. All the people that built it are long, long dead. But it's certainly, I mean, I guess you could say that he's recovering it, or finders keepers, losers weepers. In a stateless society, I would say all the land would be privatized and somebody would have a claim to that land already. Usually that land is claimed either by like a church or a state. And, I count like state claims on land as super duper not valid. So, I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on what his job is? And, he's going to take whatever he finds and sell it to like the British Museum, or what ends up happening with the Ark. And it gets taken by like the U.S. government and thrown in some warehouse somewhere.
Which, to be fair, he did not want to have that happen. He did want to have it in a museum to be studied or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a real clear answer here. Number one, for what you said, which is we don't know who actually owns the land on which these things are located, right? In the movie, anyway, it's not spelled out. Like, is this public land or does someone own it? And if someone owns it, like, did they get it legitimately? Or is it, some land that some rich guy in Latin America, like in the beginning of the movie, got just because his dad was a conquistador, or his, ancestor was a conquistador. And that's, kind of questionable, the righteousness of that claim. So yeah, without knowing who actually owns whatever land he's finding these things on, it's hard to make like a libertarian, argument of like, oh, clearly this belongs to this person. And then when it comes to like, if you zoom out to the level of nations and states and go, is it right, for example, that so many, just to take one example, so many ancient Egyptian artifacts did end up in the British Museum? It's like, on the one hand, you definitely can look at it and go, yeah, there's something that seems a bit off there, that these, the ancestors of the people who created these artifacts don't end up having them and getting the benefit of having them in their museums to get tourist dollars or whatever. On the other hand, you could say, well, and this is the argument that people who are a little bit more of apologists for imperialism than I'm comfortable with being might say, and they kind of do have a point. It's complicated, where you could say, look, if these things were left in, a somewhat unstable, chaotic part of the world where they originally were, would they have even survived intact, right? Would grave robbers not have long ago carted them off? Would they have been destroyed as, wars, for example, ravaged North Africa during World War II? So in other words, all those Egyptian artifacts in the British Museum, would they even still exist if they hadn't been, carted off as part of the white man's burden? Because yeah, you can go to the British Museum today. I've been there, like 20 years ago or whatever. But like, yeah, you can see all these things, like they're there, and they might not be available to even look at had they not been dug up and carted off to a place where they were kept safe. So yeah, it's a very tricky question. I don't think there's a very clear-cut answer.
Right. It certainly seems preferable to what's been happening, like with the Iraq wars. I understand that a lot of the historical sites were bombed and destroyed, and the museums there were looted.
Yeah. That's a great modern example. And also things like the Taliban in Afghanistan famously were like blowing up these ancient Buddhist shrines and temples. And it's like, if it was possible to teleport those things to some museum in Europe or North America or whatever, might that not be preferable to having them just destroyed and lost forever?
Right. And in another regard, speaking of the property rights, I mean, if these are in the jungle and essentially abandoned property that have not been homesteaded, then is it not, like Robert was saying earlier, the finders keepers kind of thing? Like they're the first person to rediscover it and do anything, put forth any, mixing of the labor with the land. So in essence, you almost have a homesteading argument for the grave robber.
Right. Now, in the beginning of the film, Belloc does have like a group of tribesmen, like, who appear to be super upset about Indiana's presence in the area. So maybe they have homesteaded this area, but it seemed to be that they were kind of doing his bidding. Like, he learned their language and told them some terrible story about Indiana or something.
Yeah, well, he
it
was
didn't seem like they had
them.
a real right. Yeah, it didn't seem like they had a real like, hey, that's our tomb you're raiding there, Mr. Tomb Raider guy.
Yeah, they might have been, from a somewhat different area and not even, seen that temple as part of their tribe's land, or however they would have seen it. But, the film's so fast paced and lighthearted and whatever that, like, it's probably fine for the sake of the movie that they didn't get into all these details. Like, this temple's located on these guys' tribal land. And then pretty soon you're turning into the Phantom Menace, where like you're spending the whole movie talking about trade disputes, and we're like, hey, get to the lightsabers.
Right.
That's right.
But one thing about that opening scene, and it is a great way to open a film. But that idol is like forgotten after that. Like, we that never gets resolved. In any of that DVD set, do they even talk about that idol again?
I don't think so. No, I think it's like an opening MacGuffin. And then you get to the real MacGuffin of the movie, which is the Ark. But that's like an initial MacGuffin, like an act, not even act one, but like scene one of act one MacGuffin, just to get the ball rolling and introduce the character. Yeah, It's the same thing with Temple of Doom, with the Chinese artifact or whatever that he's trying to get at the beginning of Temple of Doom when he's in Shanghai. Same thing where I don't even remember. I didn't watch Temple of Doom today. I didn't have time. And I haven't watched that one in a couple of years, probably, but same deal where, who knows?
It's kind of just introducing us into this environment, into this like general idea of here's what this guy does.
I think we're supposed to just sort of think that like he's doing this sort of thing all the time. So, it's only the rare artifact that really stands out, like the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail in Last Crusade, that like is an exception, that these kind of less famous, less desired, but still somewhat valuable artifacts are just like his sort of, daily bread and butter, nuts and bolts type stuff.
Okay. All right. Now, Robert, do you know if, did we do a movie recently where the Ark of the Covenant was utilized as a weapon of war or spoke about as one? Was that perhaps in Kingdom of Heaven, or am I mixing up in my head watching Ancient Aliens with my wife, where they were talking about the Ark potentially being like a communication device with aliens, and utilizing the pyramids as antenna and all this stuff?
Yeah. That was not in Kingdom of Heaven with Legolas. No, I don't think that.
Well,
was
I thought
in
there was something where they like thought that they had some invincible artifact that they were bringing into battle, and so they didn't care about bringing water or food, and they got routed by Saladin.
I think they didn't bring water because they were the Holy Knights, and they didn't. Yeah, they had some sort of. You're right. That they had some belief that they didn't need water. I remember that at the very end, or they wouldn't need it to beat Saladin. But I don't remember what, if anything, that they actually had.
Okay,
or was it the Ark?
Like
maybe
part of the cross.
You're right about this. Maybe you're right about this. I just don't remember.
I think maybe they had part of the cross that Jesus was crucified on, or something like that. It's all fuzzy, in my old head. Things go in and then they spill out.
But no, you're talking about the power of belief and the power of these holy relics. And that's definitely a thing. I know a lot of different churches in Europe, especially, have like a little chunk of a saint. They have their little relic that, brings in followers to come and see and go on pilgrimages and that kind of thing. I could see it being used at the head of a holy crusade or anything like that to either recover or to use in your war effort to show that God is on your side, that we're going to defeat the heathens with the power of the Lord through this magical object. I think it's a fun kind of mythological thing. I know that Christians don't generally enjoy thinking of their holy relics as magical objects, but that's generally, and they kind of fit in the same category. So, I mean, either they have power or are they just objects of focusing your belief? I tend to think, from an outsider's perspective, a holy item, an object, is like the same thing as like any other kind of MacGuffin type thing, like any kind of a occult thing that has power. You know, it has some kind of connection to a higher power, or it in itself has some sort of a power, and the holder of it is able to use it and wield it in some way. And in reality, you know, if you have a holy relic and you say, hey, this was the head of John the Baptist, come check it out, that's going to bring in people and they'll give you more money. So it does kind of have some sort of power. But anyway, I could piss off Christians all day, but I love Christians, so I'll choose not to.
All right, so that was Robert's cynical minute.
I guess. I mean, am I wrong about any of that? I don't know. Maybe. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in medieval times, Christians were more focused on objects and more focused on locations than Christians are today in general, right? Where medieval Christians like really believed if you went on a pilgrimage to a holy site, you were like closer to God in a very visceral sense. And the same thing with holy relics, you know, with the bones of a saint or a alleged piece of the true cross. Like they really believed that these had special powers. And you can find, you know, wars and battles where maybe the outcome was in part influenced by people's belief in an item. So, for example, one of the things that supposedly boosted the morale of the Normans before the Battle of Hastings was that William the Conqueror, before he went to go conquer England, he got the Pope to officially bless and legitimize his invasion of England. And then when he gets to the Battle of Hastings, one of the things that he had with him was a papal banner. And then, like, everybody on both sides of that battle knew what that meant and understood what that meant. And so, you know, there's no way to measure it, but for sure, even just having the papal banner is showing both sides, hey, the top guy with the hotline to God is on the side of this side. And so, you know, William's guys would have seen that and been like, God's on our side. And, you know, certainly any on the other side, on the Saxon side, if they were, you know, devout, would have seen that. And at very least it would have given them second thoughts and made them like, oh no, you know, are we going to lose this battle because God's on their side? And also, if I die fighting against the Pope's banner, where do I end up? You know, and that might make a little difference to morale, and that might actually influence the battle a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
In a way, it just manifests a power by its very nature of what it's being used as, right? It doesn't necessarily have to have any inherent power, but the belief in it having significance, it's like a head game almost.
It's a placebo effect.
Yeah.
If you're looking at it from a skeptical point of view, which I would too, you know, it's like, yeah, there's a placebo effect, and the placebo effect is real, even if the placebo is nothing, you know, but if enough people believe in it, it actually can have an effect.
And morale to an army is huge, especially to medieval armies where you've got all these armored soldiers like basically facing off with each other, standing toe to toe, swinging swords at each other. A lot of times medieval tactics centered around getting to the flanks and getting and pulling around and attacking them where they're vulnerable, because actual medieval formations were built like big turtles. And you had like these phalanx formations where you're basically this big armored tank, very slow moving, and you got all these guys hacking with spears and swords. And a lot of the casualties only really happened when one side lost their morale and they broke and turned and ran, and then they were ridden down by cavalry and stabbed in the back and shot with arrows and that kind of thing. But yeah, morale is everything to an army, but especially to a medieval army where you're fairly okay and you may eventually lose, but if you break and your morale breaks and you turn and start running, and it's over. It's just, there's no stopping it. There's no like reforming up and coming back together. It's too late. You're already ridden down and chopped to pieces.
Yeah, and at the Battle of Hastings, and I just bring this up because it's probably the medieval battle I've studied the most, the Saxons were on the high ground. They were on top of a hill, and they were in like a phalanx type formation, and the Normans were charging uphill at them. So everything in the world would tell you, and the Saxons are fighting on their home ground, defending their homeland from invasion, and they're on the high ground. And every rational thing would tell you like, oh yeah, they ought to win. But ultimately they lose. I mean, it's a hell of a fight. The Normans make a whole bunch of charges that don't work, and then finally manage to break through. But you know, that definitely shows you that battle, at least, morale was one of the key things that caused it to turn out the way it did.
Yeah, I can imagine all believing in the same thing, all believing the God's on your side, especially since a lot of medieval armies, I mean, sometimes you had a fairly tight-knit group, but a lot of times you've got guys that have never, I mean, speak like 20 different languages. You got armies that are composed of mercenary groups from, you know, Barbary Corsairs fighting next to Vikings, fighting next to, I mean, guys that just couldn't communicate with each other at all, didn't give a shit about anybody else except the good little band that you're with, right? Like one king will hire like 20 different mercenary bands, and then he's got his own group of knights and whatnots. But getting all those people to fight together into one cohesive mass that all believe that they're going to win, it's surprising that, you know, more medieval battles didn't end in like just pure chaos. But
right, this almost seems like a very necessary kind of concept to have to galvanize everybody into a common belief and working together towards a common goal. We talked about this with Godfather 2 and with Havana, where the revolutionaries in Cuba, Michael Corleone, saw that these people were willing to die for their cause. They had true belief in what they were doing versus kind of this, you know, crony U.S. puppet regime that was supported, that was resisting this. And so he could see the writing on the wall. I mean, it's all, you know, it's a fictional take on it, but basically that belief allows those that are more convicted to overcome like numerical odds that would be seen as against their favor, sort of like what you were talking about earlier, CJ, with the Battle of Hastings, where they're, you know, by all tactitional, you know, strategic and whatever awareness, you would say, okay, these guys have the advantage, and yet something allowed the other side to overcome.
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things about this movie that are fun to talk about.
Yeah, and so oddly enough, we got a comment on a YouTube video on one of our episodes that was like, hey, these guys actually, you know, it's like an hour and a half episode, and they only review the movie for like 20 minutes. The rest of it is they're just rambling on about just random stuff. We're doing it again, but that's fine. It's what we do. If people are familiar with it, that's what they come back for. So thank you, our audience, for sticking with us through this. Now, I wanted to close out the first problematic thing, which was that Marion and the underage potential thing, or that perspective on it. While you guys were talking, I looked up the actress who played Marion. She was actually born in 1951, and this movie came out in 81. So she was in her late 20s when this film was being made, and Harrison Ford is 9 years older. So in my head, it still works like she was maybe 1920 when Harrison Ford's character is the student of her father, and then they get romantically involved. Everything's on the up and up.
And like you said, I mean, it's a bunch of snowflakes looking for things to be outraged by. I mean,
yeah. Well, let me just give you one just insane example of that. That's even more like crazy. somebody, I came across some review from like a woke perspective, pointing out all the problematic things about the movie. And this one person, one of the things she said was, after things that are a little bit more obvious, like, oh, he's a white guy going into, these non-white countries and stealing their artifacts. Like, okay, that's it's not completely without base. Then she threw in, also, Indiana Jones's first name is Indiana, which is a U.S. state that was named in honor of conquering the Native Americans. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've watched the bonus DVD, okay? George Lucas tells you why he named the character Indiana Jones. He named it after his Malamute that he had at the time, his dog, which he said is also the dog that inspired the character of Chewbacca. And that's, by the way, why in later films, they actually, I think in Last Crusade, they actually have Sean Connery say, yeah, he took that nickname from the dog, because his name's really Henry. And so it's like, I don't think George Lucas was sitting down going, yes, let's name him Indiana because that's the most colonial name in the American states. It's like, that was the name of his dog. And I doubt he named his dog in order to make some sort of like white power statement.
Dog whistle,
these
literal dog
really
whistle.
digging up ways and stretching as far as they can to get outraged about something.
They're 1,000 times beyond Alex Jones as far as connecting dots that don't connect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I didn't see anything related to this other problematic one I wanted to bring up. And I use problematic in a jestful tone. John Rhys Davies, who plays Gimli in The Lord of the Rings, he's Welsh. And yet he's playing a Middle Eastern man or Egyptian guy. What's his name? In this one?
Sulla?
Sulla, yeah. So similar to Robert Downey Jr., playing a blackface character in Tropic Thunder, which he had a great response, I think, on Joe Rogan, where, hey, do you think you could make that movie today? And he was like, well, you could, but you'd have to deal with a lot of shit. And I wonder if people would freak out about somebody playing a Middle Eastern character now, or are they not as, I don't know, like a victim class or something like that?
Well,
I don't even know like how this all is supposed to work.
Well, I will point out that actor has a track record of doing this sort of thing because he also played a dwarf. And as far as I know, in real life, he's not a little person. So
outrageous.
Yeah. So
wait, and he also plays somebody
whole...
from another entire universe, right? Like Middle Earth.
Yeah, this whole idea of representation is beyond out of control. The idea that actors can't act as other characters. It's
Robert De Niro starred in The Irishman. Okay, he's obviously Italian, so
Indeed.
somehow it doesn't apply there.
Yeah, I remember when who was it? The lady Scarlett Johansson, when she got called like white facing when she played Ghost in the Shell.
Oh yeah,
because she's not Asian. I don't have anything interesting to say. It's just more ridiculousn's. The idea that an actor isn't supposed to act and pretend to be somebody else, it's all pretend. It's all they do. And if they do a good job, then you'll like it. And if they don't do a good job, then you'll hate it. What?
Tom Hanks is not gay, but he was in Philadelphia.
And he's not retarded, but he was in Forrest Gump.
Yeah. What was it? Movie we did recently? Oh, The Birdcage with Hank Azaria. And this is the kind of thing that on this topic kind of bothers me is when somebody bows down to this, caves to this kind of pressure, which Hank Azaria does, related to The Simpsons and voicing non-white characters like Apu. And I think he did a bunch of different voices. But also in The Birdcage, I mean, wouldn't they consider that problematic? Like he was so flamboyantly gay in that, almost in a caricature kind of sense, where I think Robin Williams is like the more, kind of, I think, Robert, this was your point. Like he's the more believable, like character. He's not like over the top.
Which is his usual way to play something, is super over the top. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's actually Nathan Lane and Hank Azaria who are over the top in that movie.
Yeah, but are they now groveling and apologizing for performing? I mean, that's the thing that's like that gets me these days, it seems as if it's really hard to make a joke anymore or do something creative. Yet at the same time, the people who complain about those things are like all about expanding boundaries and pushing barriers in other areas, but just very selectively. It's a very bizarre kind of contradictory life view, I think.
Getting upset with actors for acting. There's no area where they will not find outrage.
Yeah. So speaking of acting, is Harrison Ford a good actor? I enjoy him, his cavalier, everyman kind of take. He's not perfect. He does some, serendipitous stuff, but he's like basically the same guy in Star Wars, in, like so many different movies. Is it just him? Is that just Harrison Ford being Harrison Ford reading some lines, or is he a good actor? What's your take, Robert?
If you listen to interviews, he's all about the method of acting and the characters. He'll go on like a late night show and he'll just talk about how much fun he had being this character and the craft of acting. But it really doesn't come through in his on-screen characters from what I can see. He doesn't seem to pick roles where he totally transforms himself. He picks roles that are very much in line with who he is. And maybe that's part of, half the Hollywood typecasting him, but he doesn't seem to, or isn't allowed to really flex his acting muscles if he in fact has them. He seems to talk a good game about being an actor, but I tend to agree with you. I think he's competent and he's good at being himself for the most part. But is there a huge difference between Han Solo and Indiana Jones? Can you name it?
I mean, don't get me wrong. I enjoy him, and I enjoy many movies that he's been in. So I'm not like trying to say he's not a good, that I dislike anything he's done. I'm just saying maybe he plays to his strengths, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
The way I look at it is, I think of it more in terms of like there are two kinds of actors. There's the actor that's the chameleon, that completely different in any role, like Daniel Day-Lewis or Ralph Fiennes or something like that, where like they're totally different people in each role. And then there are actors who are kind of the same, but I still think they're good actors just in a different way. It's somebody like Harrison Ford or somebody maybe like Owen Wilson, where I still think they're a good actor. They're just good in a different way. In the way that there are some bands that each song sounds totally different and it's great. And then there's other bands like AC/DC comes to mind, where a lot of the songs are pretty similar, but they're good. So to me, it's like there's just two different kinds of things. There's the chameleon, and then there's the kind of the same thing, but it's a good same thing.
Yeah. Just kind of filling
I can go along with that. I can go along with that. The guys that do the same thing are never going to get the props that a Daniel Day-Lewis will get. They're not going to have the critics just raving over their performances, but they keep getting work. And that says something, that they obviously have some kind of charisma or talent that allows them to work well with others and keeps audiences coming back to see their stuff.
Yeah, to me, the key is just for an actor that's sort of the same in all their roles, it's just a matter of getting the right roles. Like, as long as they get the roles that kind of fit what they do, it's great. And then when they're badly miscast, it can be kind of awkward. But, as long as they're pretty good about choosing the roles that work for them, then it's fine.
Right, like Kevin Costner in a romance movie. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, Costner's another guy he's Kevin Costner pretty much no matter what. And I don't know if necessarily the roles that he's chosen were quite as successful as the types of roles that Harrison Ford has gravitated towards. Because Harrison Ford, I mean, there was a period of time where he was like the biggest guy around between Star Wars, Indiana Jones.
80s and the 90s, he was crushing it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Air Force One.
Yeah, get off my plane.
Yeah. The Jack Ryan. That was Jack Ryan,
The Fugitive.
Right?
The Fugitive.
Fugitive, yep. Which, by the way, Fugitive, I thought that movie would hold up. I watched it like 2 years ago. Aged. Not very good, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah, it's disappointing because I remember kind of being like in awe of that movie when I first saw it. and just thinking how great it was. But yeah, try watching it again, and it's like, ugh.
What's bad? Tommy Lee Jones?
I don't know, it just kind of has that,
Just
not quite a
made for
vintage feel,
TV
but
feel?
like an old feel. Yeah, like it just almost soap opera-esque, where it's like so. The dimensionality of it is like kind of weird, like where you can tell it's just not that you're not transported to a time and a place. It's more just like, oh, I'm sort of watching a thing that's like almost a play. I don't know. It's really hard to articulate what I'm trying to say, but basically my take on it from a few years ago was that it did not age well. Whereas Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, aged extremely well, like a fine wine, really.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I like that. Indiana Jones has his like nemesis in this film, but he's not really. I mean, he's kind of. I don't know. Who would you say is the villain other than just Nazis? I mean, Belloc is kind of the villain, but
he's got some sympathetic motivations.
Yeah, he's kind of a fellow traveler, just kind of a competitor for Indiana. He just happens
sort of
to be
on the
working
dark
with
side
the
of that. Like,
yeah, he's just a little bit more, even a little bit more lax in his morality than Indiana Jones is. So he's like, take him and then dial up the lack of morality a little bit more. I can't see Indiana Jones knowingly working for Nazis, right? So, like he's willing to do some somewhat shady things, but he'll draw the line somewhere. Whereas Belloc is much more just kind of, psychopathic.
Although
almost.
it's funny because at this point, the Nazis, their crimes against humanities, it hadn't come out yet, really. I mean, you could probably argue against their what their what is it? What is the thing that they did with their forced sterilization and that kind of thing, Daniel, when they would like kill like
eugenics?
Eugenics, thank you. Their eugenics program. I think that was fairly well known, although that was following the science at the time. It was quite popular among some social circles.
Yeah, and in the U.S., they got it from the U.S., didn't they?
Yeah, they were big fans
initially
of the U.S. Eugenics. They cranked it up a little bit. But it's funny because at no point does Indiana, hate the Nazis because they're Nazis. They're just an obstacle in his path to getting the Ark. Right? He's not like, you guys are evil. Does he? Is it at some point? I don't remember him doing that.
I think at some point he at least kind of acknowledges that they're bad, but definitely in The Last Crusade, which is supposed to be set a few years later, he's much more like, these are bad guys, which makes sense because a couple years later, the Nazis would have cranked up their badness more than in 1936. So, I mean, in 1936, I'm not sure the exact timing of everything off the top of my head, but they were definitely already doing some bad stuff, but definitely not like full on, death camps and all that stuff yet.
Poland was 39, right? So, I mean, this is a few years before the quote unquote kickoff to World War II.
Yeah. I think by 36, the main things, Hitler had taken power, established himself as a dictator. They had done some pretty serious things against Jews already, but nothing like what's to come. And then Hitler had also, I think by 36, he had openly repudiated the disarmament parts of the Treaty of Versailles and said, we're going to build up our military, screw you. And I think it was in 36 that the Nazis reoccupied the Rhineland, which was an area of Germany that was supposed to be demilitarized after World War I. But they had not yet
annexed Austria yet?
No, that happens in 38. And then I think the Czechoslovakia thing happens later in 38. And then Poland happens in 39.
And so, had they established the ghettos yet or no?
That I'm not sure the exact timing on when they did that. They had definitely already taken some real actions against Jews as far as,
the Star of David and that kind of thing, probably.
Yeah, kicking them out of certain professions and, there was
disarming them.
Yeah, exactly. And, like the Kristallnacht stuff, I'm not sure off the top of my head, I don't remember the exact year when Kristallnacht happened.
Right. So, but to put a frame of reference on it, this was the Olympic Games, right? 1936, hosted in Berlin. So they were still like in the international community in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, they were definitely, I think by 36, they were definitely kind of on the edge as far as like how, Brits or Americans or whoever thought of them. They definitely were, I think, starting to become a little bit scary, a little bit villainous, but not to where they're going to be in a few years. Which again, it makes sense that by Last Crusade, Indiana Jones would be a little bit more kind of clear cut. Like, yeah, these are bad guys. So I think it's in the conversation early on with Marcus Brody and the guys from Army Intelligence, where they kind of say, "Oh, an army that carries the Ark would be invincible."
Mhm.
And I don't think Indiana Jones ever explicitly says like, "And that would be evil and bad," but I think it's kind of implied pretty heavily. Like everybody in that room definitely feels like that would not be a good outcome if the Nazis got the Ark.
Right, even though by 1936 they hadn't started World War II, they hadn't invaded Poland yet.
Yeah, although they had started rearming and they had reoccupied the Rhineland, and they were definitely, Hitler was making no secret
ramping up the war machine
of that he was going to try and regain all of Germany's lost stuff and then some by hook or by crook. And of course, he had already written even as far back as in Mein Kampf, which he wrote in the 1920s. Long before he came to power, he had written about attacking Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union for Lebensraum and all those sorts of things. So, it would have been known, especially amongst fairly educated people and whatever at the time, that like, yeah, this guy's a little scary and seems to be kind of belligerent.
I wonder if in the Indiana Jones verse, if the atomic bomb would have been attributed to the Ark being activated by the U.S. because they had acquired it from Raiders of the Lost Ark and put it into storage in that massive warehouse, only to bust it out when necessary after years of conflict in World War II. Little fan fiction theory.
Yeah, hand it over to the Manhattan Project scientists and go, here, you figure out the science of this sacred supernatural thing.
Yeah, that's fun. Why haven't they delved into that at all? That'd be good.
I wanted to bring up one point. I think it was from the episode of South Park that dealt with the crystal skull and all that. But I think it was in that episode of South Park that they made the point, and it really makes sense, that at the end of the day, Indiana Jones and everything he does in the movie is completely irrelevant and superfluous to the outcome of the film. Because he ultimately completely fails to himself get the Ark back from the Nazis. Every time he's about to get it, they get it back or whatever. And ultimately, what saves the Ark from falling into the hands of the Nazis is the ultimate Deus Machina. It's like literally God wipes out the Nazis and prevents them from getting the thing. So every single thing Indiana Jones did the entire movie, everybody he fought, everybody he killed, every crazy thing he did, all of his flying around the world with the map and whatever like that with the plane, which by the way is brilliant montage way to show travel, is a little line on the map. I love that. It's so brilliant. But everything he does is completely superfluous to the outcome. So at the end of the day, you're left going like, nothing he did mattered. Right. It only matters because it entertained me for 2 hours. And that's cool. And it's fun.
Absolutely.
But it is kind of sad to think about, like, yeah, it didn't really matter. Like God would have wiped out the Nazis for getting the Ark.
Yeah, even if they'd gotten it originally, put it on that plane, took it to Berlin.
Yeah. Well, the only difference that Indiana Jones made to the ultimate outcome of the film is it was because of Indiana Jones that the Ark ended up in a warehouse in DC or somewhere in America, rather than sitting in the middle of the desert where the Nazis opened it or something like that. Right. That's the only difference he made to the ultimate outcome of the story. Is if not for him, it might have just ended up sitting in the middle of the desert somewhere or sitting in Berlin somewhere. But it wouldn't have ended up in a warehouse being looked at by top men.
Right, because it was Belloc's idea to go through to have the Jewish ritual of opening it on this weird island or whatever, and they had it in control the whole time. So yeah, that's a fun angle to take. I usually like my protagonist to be a little more affecting the plot, but it didn't even bother me at all in this movie.
Isn't it weird that you don't notice it until someone points it out, and then you're like, duh, it's like right there. But I didn't figure it out for myself. If the South Park guys hadn't hit me over the head with it, I would have never even, because I was so entertained by the movie and had so much fun with the movie, it never even occurred to me that, yeah, the protagonist doesn't matter.
Right, but he is acting all the time. He just doesn't affect the plot, which is Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
He is constantly proactively doing things. He just fails at it, and it's okay. It's totally okay.
Yeah, but even as he like fumbles through certain things, like he's overpowered by that big German brawler guy who gets chopped up out of the airplane. But he still does some pretty amazing shit, like that truck scene where he's like hanging underneath and dragging along and then climbing back up. I mean, there's some pretty high intensity like pro tagging going on there. So he kind of has wins and losses, like hits and misses. And I guess that's one thing that sort of makes him likable.
Yeah, absolutely. He's super likable.
If there hadn't been literal divine intervention at the end, the Nazis would have won.
Yeah, because he was tied to a post. He was at the mercy of the Nazis. So they open that thing. It doesn't kill them. They put 2 bullets in the head of Marion in Indiana, and they walk off to Berlin. That's the other alternate version of the ending of the movie.
How it should have ended.
Then they go on to conquer the world with the Ark at the head of the Blitzkrieg.
All right, I'm going to ask you guys one thing and see if this bothers you now that you've heard it versus before thinking about it. This amulet, which is put into position when the sun rises over, and it pinpoints the location in this city where the Ark is. And yet when he escapes from this chamber where the Ark is from all the snakes, he bursts out of an exposed and visible wall that some guy is sleeping next to. So you're telling me that this is a hidden thing? Then how come it's like this totally exposed and easy to find thing that they had already uncovered?
Yeah, that bothered me. I mean, the idea that, I mean, maybe it's it's in a constant, in the middle of excavating all this stuff, and there's all these things that they're excavating, and they're uncovering all these buried buildings. Maybe, but the way he just kind of pushes this block out easily and just climbs right out, it bothered me a little bit, but ultimately it's just all in good fun.
Yeah, I think you can get away with a lot of those sorts of things if the movie's fun enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Same thing with the submarine. That bothered me this time. And I had thought about that, before when I've watched it, where it's like, that's a hell of a long way. How many days is he on that thing? And also, really, they're in a U-boat and they never once submerged the whole time? That seems kind of weird.
Right.
I just picture him like clinging to the outside of a U-boat that's hundreds of feet under the water for days at a time. And, yeah.
Yeah, they are just going across the Mediterranean, which, what is that, like a 500-600 mile journey to wherever they were going, like near the Bosphorus?
Yeah, I mean, it's not huge, but I would imagine it probably would take, I don't know how fast those U-boats go, but it would probably take, I don't know, at least a matter of days, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine at least a few days. I mean, he could probably survive it, but to just kind of wave it away as if it was nothing is a little on the insulting side. But whatever. It's all good fun.
Yeah. So speaking of the amulet thing, I was totally prepared to be like, how would they know where the sun is exactly going to be at that time? But then in rewatching it, he actually does it 2 notches down from where the guys had put it in previously. So they must have built into the story and into the set that there was some sort of like each different day at a certain time, you would put it in a different position. And so I appreciated that.
Yeah. No, that's all the good details.
It's not like the dagger in the Rise of Skywalker thing where it's like, really? How'd they know to stand on the magical spot? And it's even worse than the thing on Goonies.
Oh yeah, we're gonna do Goonies this fall, Robert. I got it on the docket.
That's
all right,
exciting.
Sounds good. Haven't seen that in a long time, but I remember having a good time. Like the first Josh Brolin appearances, I think I recall.
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah. So we're getting to that point where we are actually super long already. So I want to bring up any final notes before we get into final summary and review, and I don't even know what we can score this out of, like number of snakes out of 10, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. I can do that. So, is it worth watching in 2021? Absolutely. It is one of the original Tridge. I don't know if it's as good as Last Crusade. It's probably better. I don't know. I'd have to watch them all back to back to back. I know in Temple of Doom is kind of generally considered to be the worst one, and I don't know where people stand on Crusade versus Raiders, but it's the one that started it all. It's the one that really inspired the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland, which was my favorite thing at Disneyland. It's so much fun being in one of those it's like a little Jeep, and then it's just moving around so much, and then it's even got the rolling ball and everything. Just a ton of fun. If you're in Disneyland, go check it out. But yeah, Raiders, it totally holds up. It doesn't have the world's greatest acting, but it doesn't need it. It's got a crackerjack of a plot, and it's got just a whole lot of fun. It doesn't take itself seriously. It's got iconic moments. It's got one of the first, before it became done to death, probably. I mean, I don't know when they started using Nazis as the bad guys, probably in Casablanca. But, which is, I don't know, what was that, back in the 30s? Casablanca. But it works really well here because they're not done like, it's basically a cartoon, but the Nazis aren't just cartoonishly evil. Like, they're not just like boiling children and cackling about it. They're after this Ark, and they have a soldier's duty to retrieve it. And, they're basically just on the other side of the equation. So it's, they're good foils for Jones, and Belloc is a good foil for Jones. And Marion's a good romantic interest. It's not overdone. It's not underdone. It's just about right. There's even a scene where he's just so beat up and they're about to have sex, but he just falls asleep, which I particularly enjoyed, because that happens, guys. That happens. You get tired. You're out a full day of punching Nazis and barely surviving and killing people. You're too tired to have sex afterwards. So I appreciated that realism from Steven Spielberg in this realistic movie. So I'm going to give this 8.5 bullwhips out of 10. I thought it was fantastic. I would watch again. I will watch it again. I'll probably watch the whole trilogy again, which I have done in the past. And I do also have a box DVD set. I don't know if it's as fancy as Prof CJ's, but it is good. And I highly recommend it.
All right. So I love that you totally ignore that there was a continuation after the trilogy. That makes it even better. So, Prof CJ.
There's a scene in Crystal Skull where monkeys come down and defeat like the bad guys. Monkeys. Like they have, all of a sudden he has power over monkeys.
Yeah, and isn't it like a UFO that rises out of the
UFO, and he survives an atom bomb by getting in a refrigerator?
Yeah, okay? I appreciate that one.
Yeah, and they crash a Jeep off a cliff into a river, and the Jeep just kind of goes with the river, and they're fine, and yeah.
Yeah,
it's like the people who made Crystal Skull didn't even watch the original series. Like, let's make the world of Indiana Jones like magical somehow. I mean, I know that there's like the Ark of the Covenant, but anyway, I'm going to stop. You go ahead, Daniel. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I'll throw mine out there, and then we'll save best for last, which is what my kids like to say. They like to save like their favorite food item for the last thing that they eat, which is kind of frustrating as a parent, but also kind of cute and adorable. So we're going to say best for last. Prof CJ, we'll get your number of snakes on a plane after my little take here. So Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, does it hold up? You're darn tootin' it holds up. It is a lot of fun. Steven Spielberg probably at his peak powers. Harrison Ford probably at his peak powers. And it is just a romp that it doesn't get boring at any point. It's the right length. They don't drag anything out. Everything is there that is necessary, and they even sort of cut through to things that don't necessarily need to be shown. It's just a lot of fun, and I think that this is a movie that will stand the test of time. It already has lasted 40 years and still looks great, and I think it'll go another 40 years and still look great. So I'm going to give it 9 snakes in a pit with the Egyptian staff amulet that pinpoints where the Ark is. And we'll go to you, Prof CJ, for your score and final summary and review.
Yeah, I would concur on the number of snakes. I'd also go with 9. Out of the trilogy, which, as the Pope of Indiana Jones, I say that Crystal Skull is not part of the canon. Out of the trilogy, I would say that Last Crusade is my favorite, and I think by most objective kind of standards, it's the best of the 3. Temple of Doom is the weakest of the 3, but I still really like it and think it's really good. So that's, I'm not trying to, I don't know, damn it with faint praise. I think Last Crusade is an overall better movie, but I totally get that Raiders of the Lost Ark was establishing the character and setting up, what became a franchise, and it does a great job at all that. So, a few little nitpicks and imperfections here and there, I'm not gonna dwell on too much. I love anything that has the pulp sort of feel to it, whether it's in a kind of a mystery genre or an action adventure genre or a sci-fi genre. I'm just a huge fan of classic pulp. And so for that reason, I also love this movie. I love the real trilogy. It's also the same reason I love the real Star Wars. So I love that. George Lucas is doing what he does best in this, which is big picture, coming up with a concept. George Lucas came up with the basic concept of Indiana Jones for the most part, but then thankfully he turned over writing the actual screenplay and doing the directing to other people, which, you can just look at all the Star Wars stuff he did, and that's generally the best Star Wars, is where he's the big picture visionary guy coming up with the basic idea, and then other people work out the details usually better than he could. So it's sort of a perfect, you got Lawrence Kasdan doing the screenplay, which is that's what he's the best at. He's not as good at directing when he directs. Spielberg, again, in his prime, right? So, it's lightning in a bottle in a lot of ways. And, the 2 sequels, also very good. And like I said, I like Last Crusade even a little bit better. Sean Connery in that is just awesome as Indiana Jones's father. It was kind of his first role, I think, where he wasn't like the leading man, tough guy sort of character. So it's cool to see him play more of a, dorky kind of a character, but do it great. So.
All right. Yeah. Very good take. And yeah, I agree. Specialization and finding your niche and finding symbiotic relationships can help create a better product at the end.
You got to know what you're good at and what you're not so good at.
Right. And then find complementary partners to work with. If I recall, I think Mike C., a frequent guest on our show, he sent me a video about Star Wars and how it was saved in the edit. So basically, George Lucas had shot a script, and his first reel of it, presentation of it, was the story was boring and it lacked a lot of the iconic kind of things on it. And his wife, and I think Steven Spielberg, went and edited it and turned it into the iconic, beautiful film that it resulted in. Now, fact check me on this because I might be wrong, but I will find that and put it on the show notes page, because I think it goes to your point of the specialization of people finding the thing that they're good at and finding other people who are good at certain aspects to create this beautiful product at the end here, which is the Indiana Jones trilogy.
Yeah. Look at the Star Wars prequels, and it's like there's a lot of great big picture ideas there, but the execution is terrible because Lucas controlled everything that time.
Yeah, and the big picture, he had to also bring up so much detail. It gets so convoluted, that
arguing about trade routes for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And there are fan edits of the prequels that are much better to watch. Those they're out there to be found. Check them out.
All right. Well, I think that this was a really good episode. Prof CJ, thank you so much for coming on, and people can find your work at profcj.org or dangeroushistorypodcast.com if I have the links correct, and we'll have them on the show notes page, of course.
Yep, either one works. And yeah, it's been fun. Thanks for having me on.
All right, well, I hope you can stick around for a little bit longer because we do some Patreon bonus content, which we affectionately call Kathleen Turner Overdrive. But before we get to that, Robert, next week, we're going to be going into even more camp, and that is a stoner film, Half Baked, starring Dave Chappelle, with our buddy Jared Wall of Breaking Liberty. He's been on for Hotel Rwanda, Gold, the Breaking Bad movie that I forget what it was called, El Camino, among others. So he's a great guest and a good buddy. So we're going to have him on for Half Baked, which I think will be a bit of a change of pace next week.
Indeed. I generally have an aversion to doing comedy films, but perhaps this movie will prove me wrong and give us plenty of good fodder with which to dissect. I know weed is mostly generally accepted in the culture today, so it's not like any kind of taboo thing, and it's just kind of vestigially illegal on the federal level for the most part. In actual culture, as laws require, actual human will to enforce, most people are basically just like, it's just weed. So to see a film kind of like The Birdcage, which was, trying to normalize it at the time, watching it again in 2021, you're like, it's kind of conquered territory. We'll see if it actually has any arguments to make, or if it's just a laughing comedy where I don't even know if the funny is going to still be there or not. We'll see. But Dave Chappelle, I mean, obviously a comic genius. So I don't remember. Is he the main character of the film? I don't recall.
It's a bit ensemble, but yeah, he's pretty main in it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll check it out.
Yeah, I hope it holds up. And just I saw a story today that in California, the feds seized $1.19 billion worth of weed. So
today,
in recent times, like the news article was from today, so it probably happened in the last week or so. So I mean, these things are still happening while states have legalized these things. Even California, I believe, has legalized, and in a sense, it's tax and regulate. But
right. But I mean, you see the Facebook comments on those kind of things, though, and they're basically
give those people back their stuff.
Yeah, putting the feds through the ringer. They're like, this is nothing to be proud of, you violent thugs. Give him back his stuff.
Right, but yeah, those things are still kind of happening, even in states that have "quote unquote" legalized. I use the quotes advisedly because, in my view, it should be decriminalized in the respect that there is no law, there is no license, there is no permit required. But of course, I live in a utopian fantasy land of voluntary interactions.
Weirdo.
I must be an extremist. So anyway,
you've been on the Facebook lately?
I have been on the Facebook, getting lots of warnings about all my friends and probably myself. They're getting warnings about me. I don't know if I got warnings from you, Prof CJ, but probably, because you've done 8 episodes on Woodrow Wilson right now, and he's a patron saint of the cathedral. So
yeah, and I've done all kinds of other stuff they wouldn't like anyway. So.
All right. Well, we like it, and we like you, and we appreciate you coming on and doing this with us, and we appreciate our audience. So if you guys want to support what we do here, give us a subscribe on the YouTube, go to our Patreon and spend some money, send us dollars that way, and you get some pre-show bonus content, and also the Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is some post-show bonus content. And I guess we can wind it down there. So find the show notes and more at lastnards.com/185. And we'll see you guys all next week for Half Baked with Jared Wall of Breaking Liberty. And with that, we'll say good night from last night, everyone. Peace out.